Here we are at beautiful Whangaroa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody. My name's Asha Andersen and I'm a volunteer with Transition Towns, Bay of Islands, Whangaroa. And I'm here at the beautiful Whangaroa woolshed with my very good friend Barbara Belger. And this is part of a series of meaningful conversations that we're going to be having and sharing with you. Barbara's here with me today to have a really important conversation that I think we all need to be thinking about, and especially in these challenging times. So I'd like to welcome Barbara, and I'm going to just share a little bit with you about this amazing woman's incredible skill set and experience. So Barbara's a resilience coach, and she has training in mental health and trauma support, all kinds of therapies related to helping people move through their traumas and move through their grief, including NPL strategies, timeline therapy, hypnosis, energy psychology, and emotional freedom technique, tapping. Many wonderful and interesting methods that many of us are only beginning to learn about. So I'd like to welcome Barbara here today. We're going to have a conversation about trauma and grief, largely relative to all of the challenges that we're dealing with at the moment, and how grief, is impacting us, and the different stages of grief. So welcome, Barbara.
Oh, thank you, Asha.
So before this conversation, I sent through to you an analogy that I heard quite a few times, and it's a really simple one, and it helped me to kind of understand clearly that while we're all dealing with, the same storm, whether it be the ecological collapse and climate change, which is such an overwhelming thing, we're all within this storm together. We're not all necessarily on the same boat. We're at different levels of ability, have different financial and social support. We're in different boats, but we're weathering the same storm. And so I think that analogy really helped me to kind of put in perspective how we're all having different lessons and going through different things at the moment. Yeah,
absolutely. In NLP, we have a presupposition that the map is not the territory, and people's maps are different. If I give you a map of Kerikeri, you can read it on the map, but to experience Kerikeri, you still have to walk it.
Yes.
And that's maybe the difference of perception also. And I think trauma is a big topic, so I don't know how much we can get into that today. Maybe our focus will be on grief. But ahead of our trauma discussion, one of the main factors that changes in people's minds is actually your ability to differentiate. Through trauma, your resilience level drops. So the earlier you sustain a trauma or adverse childhood experience, whatever you want to call it, the less resilient you become in life.
Would you explain for us a little bit about what is grief?
Grief is your response. It's a process. According to Elizabeth Kübler-Ross, who was a Swiss-American psychotherapist, it is a process that everybody goes through at different stages, at different speed, let's say. But regardless of what the situation, she even expands it into not only the loss of a dear one, but actually losing your job or getting a painful diagnosis from your doctor about a disease, or now, as we experience now, we're seeing the loss of situations in life that are simply maybe not ever returning. So for the mind to actually conclude that and return to a new normal, we have to go through various stages of grief.
Yes. Yeah. So there's huge amounts of loss going on at the moment, as you say, whether it's family members or friends or just even people within your community or your country passing away. let alone the people who are losing their jobs, losing their businesses, and the loss of our natural environment.
So maybe I'll just go through the stages of grief as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had defined it, and so it starts with denial. She said at first the first reaction to, and we will probably remember from last year when the whole crisis started to happen in the world, that at first, that can't be true. It's only happening in China. It's only happening in Italy. We didn't even think that it would ever happen everywhere in the world, let alone here in beautiful little New Zealand. And that is denial. And you'll see that you see that in with everything. You get a diagnosis from your doctor. You just say, maybe get a second opinion, or maybe it's not true. And it's healthy to have denial, I think, in a way. You just have to be aware that where how much will you then integrate and go through the process and go through the next process, or insist of denial and then just go in circles. But the second stage of grief is anger. And then it really depends on culture of how much do you agree to your anger, how much do you accept your anger. There are, like, especially in the Anglo-Saxon culture, anger is not accepted. To show anger, it's just not cool to actually show it. In the south of Italy or South America, you can clearly see when someone is angry. It's as healthy as everything else. You need to experience it, quite the contrary, to process it. So that is anger. And I wrote out, so why, you go, why me? It's not fair, and how can this happen to me?
Looking for someone to blame.
Why would this happen? And people are quite tempted, if they stay stuck in that, to actually feel like a victim. And then comes a whole different topic of the victim triangle and never getting off that. So it is important to experience the anger and find strategies to actually deal with it.
Because you can use anger you can direct your anger, can't you? If you
accepting it is one, and sitting with it and acknowledging, just even saying, wow, I'm really angry now. I'm really angry. And no emotion stays in your body for long. It is meant to be processed. So if you let the emotion come up and accept it without resisting it, it actually gets processed.
Right.
And out of anger, especially anger is really interesting. There's such a lot of energy behind anger. A lot of creativity can arise. Right. So a lot of solutions come from this place where someone at some stage first got really, really angry about a situation, and then
enough to change it.
Yeah, it's quite a creative force as well. So then the next stage, according to Kubler-Ross, is bargaining. And that is, sometimes people actually negotiate with God. I give you my life against, or, just having a few more months I can participate in my daughter's wedding. Or so you start to negotiate, you start to bargain. And it's just important to realize that is also just part of the process. So with this, I think important is awareness. Where am I? So now I start this, and that's the bargaining process. Anyway, the next stage, number 4, is I don't like terms like that, but the sad part. That's where you start to go into depression, and what's the point? I've only got a couple of more months to live. Why should I bother? And we see, if any of these phases that we've spoken so far, worldwide, we could see the last 12 months. We could see the anger. We could see I can see in my circle of friends worldwide that there's a great element of depression happening. It's, well, will we ever get out of this? It's just, why bother? And depression is quite you lose your human way of defending your opinion, trusting your intuition, be centered.
It's a hopeless.
It's like literally cover the blanket over your head, and it's the freeze. In the animal world, it's the freeze response.
Right. Yeah.
And you become maneuverable. So you accept anything that is being done upon you. It's,
almost seems like anger would be, higher than than depression, right?
That's right. So there is a colleague of mine defined depression as the figure of 8, where you oscillate between being very, very sad and then telling yourself, comes anger and you get up. It's literally like this figure of 8 repeating. So you get angry and then tell yourself off, and you tell yourself off enough to start feeling really, really bad, and then go back into this depression, the very, very sad loop, and it carries on and on. So to find a way to interrupting that loop is quite often a good strategy forward. So then you get into acceptance. You get into and that is not surrender or giving up, but like right now at the moment, I think we're in some parts of the world where, like I think here in New Zealand, we had a pretty good way of dealing with this whole pandemic, and people have accepted, a large majority of people have accepted there is, okay, we have this situation, and now we've got to find a way of living with it. And whichever way they are going, for some people the only solution is still a lot of protection, mask and distance, or vaccination, or talk about herd immunity. But there's a certain element of acceptance, and that is a typical sign of coming towards the end of your grief cycle. And recently it was introduced the idea of actually adding a next phase to the grief cycle, and that is meaning.
Okay, yeah, finding meaning and learning the lesson.
Yeah, and I'm very much in favor of circling back to meaning. I think we're meaning-making machines, humans, and if we and it's a very good strategy to actually be self-empowered and keep things to within yourself and go through it without becoming, like I said before, the victim or now being really angry against everything and everybody, and so having meaning, I think it's good.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot.
So we hope that it will be useful for people out there to understand the grief process.
I think becoming aware of it can give you a completely different perspective on it, especially when you recognize yourself, in those patterns and going through those stages. Yeah, and honoring them too, because as you said, it is a natural response. It is, actually part of how the process is supposed to happen, but it's where we get stuck along the way.
When things are normal, our social engagement faculties work. Our social engagement center, or whichever one you want to call it, that means I can use my 5 senses. I can perceive the world in all its beauty. I can look in someone's eyes. I feel my heart rate is regulated, and I can hear what you're saying. I can see the totality of information.
Is that what you call coherence?
That is coherence. A lot of it is being regulated through breath. So heart rate variability or coherence is a good term to get familiar with. As soon as, like when we started at the beginning of it, usually people get a little bit nervous. Yes. And it's just, again, it's the awareness of, here I am a little bit nervous. So I don't hear, did she say that? Or did I take my notes, or did I forget something? And that is Literally, you just go down the vagal ladder just a little bit. Not quite fight, flight, but in that direction where it's your body's natural response to do something because you feel threatened in some way or form. And then the low level on your vagal ladder, if you want, is the freeze response. And so feeling numb, giving up. Literally, if you look in the animal world where, mammals just tip over and they just freeze and the predator quite often thinks that they're dead. And it is like a near-death kind of response. That is what we humans also still do. So those, and I've heard it a lot and also seen it myself last year during level 4 lockdown. Do I get out of the house? Do I actually want to see other people? No, rather stay at home. It's too much. And that is, you've got to just be aware that that's where you you lose your social engagement systems.
Right.
Also really important is, I just mentioned it before we started, is eye contact. So when you talk with people, when you listen to them, you naturally actually look at people's eyes. As soon as a tiny little bit of threat happens, in whichever shape or form, even imagined, you start to look at people's mouth, because you want to know whether your predator is going to eat you or not. It's an old the vagus nerve is the oldest system. It just regulates everything. So for people not to be able, with wearing masks, not to be able to actually tell what's going on in this person, I can only see the eyes, but I myself feel a little bit challenged now. I don't know what's happening with this other person. That itself can cause a lot of stress, and stress for your immune system for many reasons. Sustained length of stress is just quite unhealthy.
That's what many of us are going through at the moment globally, really, isn't it? So it's these many layers of different stresses, as well as the grief of the loss of our planet and what the suffering that's happening, not just for the environment but for the COVID-19 and with people's health, and just the loss of our societies are really shifting, huge shifts that are very uneasy kind of shifts. And I wonder, what impact that might have on the younger generation growing up in that kind of environment.
I think on a psychological, spiritual level, it is a crisis.
Yes.
And out of a crisis comes growth. I think as humanity, we have a huge opportunity to grow through this. Like with grief, once you've finished your grief cycle, you're not the same person that you were before. You can't ever step into the same water twice. And you grow. You have more choice in life. You make different decisions, and so that I think as a message of hope, that at the end of this, there will be growth. We will collectively experience a lot of growth. And then we could hypothesize whether it was necessary to happen. Because I think the old system, the way it was before, 2019, economically, politically, journalism, medical systems, education systems, I could name endless discussions I had with people when I said it's just not working anymore. So now we have a chance.
That's so true. Yeah. And I think we have had the discussion before about crisis as an opportunity. Yeah, opportunity for growth, for transformation.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing things that came out immediately, of our lockdown was our amazing crop swap.
Absolutely.
Which I really am starting to see as just an incredible way of bringing people together and of creating healing and creating hope and actually doing the things that we want to be doing, and we kind of, the situation demanded of us that we get around to doing it. Yes. So that was really cool.
And that is what we said before with, for creativity and in moments where we implement strategies to regain balance, physical strategies or mental strategies, that we use these moments to focus on what is it that we want. And during our Zoom discussions during lockdown, we talked about food security, community is really important. So those were our focal points, and out of that came the crop swap. And it's definitely very important to your stress response changes when you know you've got a team, you can reach people, you've got a group that you can connect with, you have a food supply. You don't have to wait for toilet paper to run out in supermarkets and be totally stressed about it, which really happened. It happened in Australia. It happened in Germany. I just spoke to someone about that. But also food, basic food. If you know how to garden, if you know where your friends are with certain crops, and you don't run out of food, that is a security. It's important to know that, and human contact.
Yeah, cool. I just have one other question, and then maybe we can finish up this video, and if we have time, do another short one just now about things that can help us to deal with our grief. Practical actions.
Yes.
But my last question is about people being at different stages of grief, and how this can bring people into conflict and disharmony. So we are going through COVID-19 together, and it's very very challenging in many different ways, and one of them being that many of us have different views on what should be done, or what is being done about it, and this can bring people into conflict with your good friends and your family, and it becomes very difficult to resolve.
Yes.
Do you have any insights or any thoughts around how to deal with that? Or
probably where the best way to start is to accept people where they're at.
Yes.
If it doesn't have to, I don't have to share people's opinion, but if what they tell me, that is their truth.
Yes.
Currently. And we're asked, this is where we talk about the spiritual aspect of it. We've been asked for a couple of 1,000 years to walk this planet with compassion, with love for Mother Earth, and we are love. This is the time to do it. It's not on a sunny day when everything is perfect. When things become challenging, can I still be in my heart and have compassion for this being? And of course, stay safe, especially in the face of a raging fellow human being. but that is their truth. Yeah. That is their truth. So to stay in that and say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I'm here. I'm your fellow human friend. And now let's see where we go from here. So even just acknowledging that, and then accepting that everyone will be at different levels of crisis. It will, if you've never been used to being without a job and a $100,000 income per year, then losing all that will be hugely challenging. Yes. It's peanuts for people who've navigated this for a while. Cultural background will be different. Yes. That's where, mental health aspects come in places where there's a much less rigid structure, mental health structure. I'm thinking of some places in Asia. People will navigate through it just because they're not labeled. So now you're depressed, and now you have a psychotic attack or whatever. They just go through it and probably will come out of it. But here, wow, we've got to be careful. That's signs of such and such label. Yeah. So many aspects to it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks everybody for joining us. We hope to have many of these conversations as time allows, and talk to different people and bring forth different ideas, meaningful conversations at Whaiawa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.